Today on Locked On Canadiens, we're talking about some far-fetched things. Fleetwood Mac getting back together, Oasis getting back together, and the Montreal Canadiens making a trade with the Boston Bruins.
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into episode 1356 of Locked On Canadiens. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day and for subscribing wherever you get your podcast. Doing that supports us here at the show and ensures you do not miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. My name is Ian Boisvert, also known as Maybe It's Ian. I am once again not joined by Laura Saba, also known as the Actor Stick. She will be back next week. So you're riding solo with me once again on our Mailbag edition of this week on Locked On Canadiens. So we'll jump into the Mailbag after our first segment here. The first segment, 2C or not 2C, is making a return. We're talking Pavel Zacha. Apparently his name is floating around there on the trade market. And maybe the Canadiens should be interested in a player like that. And then we'll hit our mailbag. You guys did not disappoint, as always. We're all over the map. I cannot wait to get into your questions. A quick programming note before we begin. I'm recording this on Thursday evening, shortly after we learned the fate of the Hockey Canada trial. We're not discussing that on this episode. And the reason for that is I need more time to process it. We all need more time to understand what this means and formulate our thoughts in a way that is meaningful and respectful to the process that went on. So we will be talking about this next week. So take that also as a programming warning. We will spend a segment on this early next week. So keep that in mind, but we won't be discussing that today. We're not avoiding it. We need time to assess what happened. So with that, there's no great way to transition, but we have to. We will head into our first segment here of 2C or not 2C. We're talking Pavel Zacha, center for the Boston Bruins. The reason we're talking about Pavel Zacha is his name popped up on a trade board on the fourth period. The entry reads, the Bruins explored the trade market on Zacha during the season, and there is belief out there that Boston is looking again at moving him. His 10-team no-trade list turned into an 8-team no-trade list on July 1st, so he does have some say in where he ends up if dealt. He has 2 years remaining on his contract. This is not a rumor roundup segment because Montreal's not linked. So I'm leaving. That's my, I get to make that bit. So that's my call. This is a 2C or not 2C because we're talking about a potential second line center here for the Canadiens. And look, there's a lot to like about Pavel Zacha as a potential, Dvorak type upgrade that would fit your second line pretty well. He's a 6'3" center, 206 pounds, a left shot center, which is, if you're looking for the Canadiens to find a center, a left shot would be just perfect. They wouldn't scoff at a right shot center, but I think everybody knows they would like a lefty to be able to take some of those tough faceoffs. He's 28 years old. He's coming off a down season in Boston. Down points and goals across the board. 14 goals, 33 assists in 47 points in 82 games played. Boston was 28th in goals for, so it makes sense that his offense died along with the rest of the Bruins. 53.2% at the faceoff dot, though. That is pretty good. That is, if you're looking for a center who can go out there and win draws for you in key moments of the game, and you know it's on the left side of the ice, that's a guy you would tap and feel pretty good about winning that draw, or at least being competitive at the dot on any given night. He was also top 50 in shorthanded ice time for forwards. He was, I believe, 46 or 47th. Him and Elias Lindholm were right there, right below Josh Anderson, interestingly enough. So consider that as your, if you're looking at, replacing Josh Anderson with a guy who plays on the penalty kill just as much, or replacing Dvorak with a guy who plays just as much as Anderson, like Dvorak did last year. Pavel Zacha could be your guy. Now, Boston wasn't very good on the penalty kill last year. They were 24th with a 76.3% rating on the penalty kill. So it's tough to know if him stepping into a new situation, playing a different system, playing with different players would help him in that respect. So, take that with a grain of salt. His penalty killing, I won't even say prowess, but his appearances on the penalty kill. It's tough to know how much of that is his impact, how much of that is just the team was terrible, Jeremy Swayman couldn't stop a puck for most of the season. There are a lot of factors there, and it's an interesting gamble to take if you're Montreal, thinking, well, he did play a lot of penalty kill. We could put him out there and feel pretty confident. We'd have to see, how he would fit into a different system. As the fourth period mentioned, 2 years left on his contract, $4.75 million cap hit both years. He owns an 8-team no trade list, which, let's be honest about what an 8-team no trade list means. 8-team no trade list right now in the National Hockey League means I'm not going to Canada or Buffalo. But let's call it what it is. That is them saying I'm not doing that. So that's not to say he would never come to a team like Montreal. He would just Montreal would need to be a team he would waive his no trade clause for. No trade clauses are not, I do not want to be traded. No trade clauses are, you cannot trade me without my approval unless I want to go. So, they can be moved around. They can be, massaged by the acquiring team trying to talk to the player and work those things out. With Carey Price on long-term injured reserve, the Habs can exceed the cap by another $5.98 million. So they could fit him in if they decide Carey Price is going to go on long-term injured reserve, or if they trade the entire cap hit away, like we sort of expect them to do in September. They will be able to fit him under their salary cap. So it becomes a matter of price at that point, not Carey Price, the price of the acquisition here. And I can't help but think that Boston's not going to just let this guy walk away for very little. Second line centers are at a premium. Centers are at a premium in the National Hockey League, but especially the type of guy that Pavel Zacha is. Every team that was trying to improve this offseason was seemingly trying to find a guy like that. I don't know why Boston has had a hard time moving him. I wonder if his price is too high, like if the price that they put on him is too high and they're not buckling. But Boston is a team that I could see thinking we're going to be better this next season. And then by, American Thanksgiving, they're going, well, actually, we're not actually that good. And then they decide, okay, it's time to move off some of these guys again and do another teardown like they did last year. Look, the teardown that Boston did last trade deadline was impeccable. They did a great job tearing that down to the studs, getting rid of parts, bringing parts back, and sort of rebuilding their prospect pool, which has been terrible for a very long time. I wonder how long it'll take Boston to realize that's going to be the case again this year, because I don't see them climbing anywhere in that division. I don't think that they improved in any meaningful way. If not, they've made a lot of moves that kind of make you question. Like Tanner Jeannot is a terrible contract in Boston. With that said, like Montreal has a lot that they could offer Boston should they decide to go the, we're looking for younger players route. I wonder about a guy like a Jayden Struble in that instance. He's from New England. He's from Rhode Island. I know he grew up a Bruins fan. He plays the kind of game that a Boston Bruin would be, adored for playing. He's a mean big guy when he wants to be. So I wonder if he definitely wouldn't be the centerpiece of a trade like that. Montreal would probably have to throw in a pretty high pick and Jayden Struble to make that sort of deal happen. But I wonder, what they're thinking about with that player. It's a guy that maybe Boston's scouting staff got a lot of looks at when he was in college in the area. What I can't wrap my mind around is what I mentioned earlier, that if Boston, as the fourth period mentions, was trying to trade him at the deadline and couldn't do it, and now with every team looking for a second line center, not being able to trade this player, or not at least getting a deal that makes them want to trade this player, do teams internally look at this player and say, I don't think that this is a fit for us? Or do they look at the price that Boston's throwing at them and saying, there's no way you're going to get that? And maybe that changes, right? As teams sort of, I mentioned with Boston in the fall, they might get to a point where they realize they're not good enough and start to sell off. There are going to be some teams who realize that they're not good enough and try to sunk costs fallacy themselves into adding. Like a team like, I don't know, Nashville is a team that if they start to stink for a little while, Barry Trotz, pegs me as the kind of guy to be like, actually, we're just going to keep adding and see what happens. So I wonder a lot about if this player was truly available and is truly what his numbers indicate him to be, why hasn't a team made a move for him yet? So I'm sort of curious as to the reporting here, curious as to the market here. There's a lot to be uncovered with how this particular trade chip or trade saga plays out. So we'll see how that unfolds. Kent Hughes, I would not put it past him to make an August type trade, but if they want to wait until Carey Price is ready to be traded off of LTIR, that would happen in September. I'm wondering, are the Canadiens holding up plans for the rest of the league while waiting for Carey Price to come off of LTIR? We'll have to see how all that unfolds, and we'll leave that there. When we come back, it's your turn. We're going to the mailbag. We'll talk about some division realignment, Hutson, the sniper, and we are talking, for some reason, about Oasis and Fleetwood Mac, and we'll get into all of that in just a second on Locked On Canadiens. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. For me, if you've heard me on this show, you know that I was getting killed by takeout and subscriptions that I didn't know were there. They add up faster than you expect. You don't see them. Monarch Money puts all of that information in one spot. So I know what I'm spending, and I know how to curb that spending later on. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, let's hit the mailbag here. Let's get us started with Mouse of the West, who has the first post for us here. Let me pull this up. Apologies. Expansion or not expansion? We kind of covered that a little bit last week. Not big fans of expansion at this point. Expansion for expansion's sake just kind of seems silly to me. The league isn't itching for two more teams. It just seems like a way for the owners to just get two more expansion fees from two other cities, and hooray, now there's more NHL teams. The fact that the NHL thinks that they can go to 34 before any other league does is just kind of asinine to me. But anyway, how would an expansion draft affect the Habs, assuming the same structure as the Kraken expansion? We did that a little while ago. We covered off on what that expansion protection list might look like right now if they were to do it right now, or thinking in the future who they'd have to protect. So we covered that. It's everybody's going to lose somebody if they do expansion. Everyone's going to lose two somebodies if they expand by two, which it kind of seems like they might. So we're just going to have to all be okay with that. This is where I wanted to focus our attention on in this question. Should they realign the divisions? Regardless of whether or not the NHL expands, the answer to this question is yes. And not only realign the divisions, get rid of this playoff format. There's one person on the planet who likes this playoff format, and it's Gary Bettman. Everybody else, by and large, prefers 1 versus 8. And you can if you want to keep the divisions and you want to just do 1 versus 8 where the top two seeds are your your division winners, fine. But if you want to do, if you want to move everybody around again, that's I don't see a world where Montreal, Florida, and Tampa are in the same division. It doesn't make sense. The NHL did this to create rivalries, and I don't think it's worked in any meaningful way. I think that the rivalries that they've gotten have been very short-lived because you're just hoping for playoff matchups. And while yes, we have had a lot of playoff rematches over the last half decade or so, the Battle of Florida would have been the Battle of Florida without them being in the meeting in the playoffs. They hate each other because of their proximity, because of how often they've played each other. I guess Toronto versus Florida is a rivalry that we didn't see coming, but how much of it's a rivalry when Toronto just gets their teeth kicked in every time? I don't know that this format works for anybody. 1 versus 8 to me is just the more fair way of doing it. And honestly, we're going to get a play in at some point where seeds, 7, 8, 9, and 10 play each other in a quick, round robin before, not round robin, but like a 1-game series or at most like a best of 3 before the actual playoffs start. I think it's only a matter of time before we get there. And honestly, cool. Like I like that idea. I think right now there are so many teams that just missed the playoffs that are quite good. And I think it would be really great drama and storylines to put those guys in winner take all games and see what they have. Like Calgary, for example, that's a team I would have liked to have seen in sort of one of those matchups, and maybe they knock off a 7 or an 8 seed on their way in. Columbus is a perfect example. Like that's a team that, if it came down to it, it probably would have been Montreal and Columbus playing in a play-in. That would have been pretty cool. It would have been really stressful, especially, with Jet Greaves playing the way that he was, and then having to see him in the AHL when Laval took on the Cleveland Monsters. But I think all of this to say that I think there's a lot of unrest with the way that the NHL is currently structured. And, regardless of whether or not they move to 34 teams, 17 in each conference, I think it's time for us to recycle this and go back to what fans had really liked. Which I know isn't Gary Bettman's forte. He doesn't really like doing things that we like, but I think it's about time. All right, let's move on. Laura has some questions for me. First question is Crosby ? The answer to that one is always yes, Laura, except if you're a Pittsburgh fan and then you just get really upset and start making stuff up. Can a case be made that the Habs are the handsomest team in the NHL, even with UL Armia gone? Probably. I think so. Like, I think, yes, they subtracted Armia, but I feel like the addition of Carrier also like his addition on the ice is underrated in this respect. I don't know enough about the other teams and how these players look because most of the time I'm a big nerd and I'm just looking at them on Hockey Reference and I'm like scrolling past the picture. I don't really care to see that. So I would need some assistance on that one from those who might be inclined to do so. If you have an opinion on this one, put it in the comments below the video on YouTube and tell us your thoughts. Let's move to Scott here. We're just hitting the Locked On Canadiens circuit, as it were, on this episode. He asks, is Oasis or Fleetwood Mac reuniting the biggest shock in 2025? Or the bigger shock in 2025, rather. To me, it's not Oasis. And the reason it's not Oasis is I feel like that rivalry was just two brothers who were just kind of sick and tired of looking at each other. And Fleetwood Mac has way more nonsense and vitriol stored behind the Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks split. There's way more there. So to me, I'm personally more surprised by that one. Although you can make the argument that maybe maybe the Fleetwood Mac folks outside of Stevie Nicks needed some money. That argument can always be made. Thanks for that one. Scott Claude Sauvé asks, for fun line combinations, I have a suggestion for a summertime activity for your followers. Fun possible line combinations or D pairings of the future. Mine is Little John Mooney between Thorpe and Papanikis. Could be fun to watch in a few years. He points that out because Little John Mooney is obviously very small, and you have Thorpe, who is 6'5", 220, and Papanikis, who's 6'5", 202. And if things get out of hand, throw Florian 6'4", 200 pounds into the mix. Yeah, I like that a lot. I like this idea a lot. If you guys have ideas, put them in the comments below. The one I have is a 3-on-3 option for if and when the Canadiens make it to overtime. You put out Doc, Zachary Bolduc, and Caden Gooley, and you call it Doc Duck Ghouls. So like Duck Duck Goose, Doc Duck Ghouls. I think that's pretty good. I think a lot of this too comes from, you can go and look at Sean McIndoe Down Goes Brown at The Athletic doing nickname court, I believe is what it's called, where he goes over player and line nicknames, and we all debate whether or not any of them are any good. I still think pound for pound, one of the best ones in the league that most people don't know about is the Boy Genius line. And it helps that line is one of the best in the league, but it's also just, for me as like an enjoyer of indie rock music, I really enjoy that just as the visual aspect of how accurate it is for each of those players. All right, we'll leave that half of the mailbag there. When we come back, we have some more questions, some about Doc, some about Hutson, and we'll get into all of those in just a minute on Locked On Canadiens. All right. Next couple questions here are from our pal Randy. Randy asked, will Struble sign before his hearing? He is next to be traded, in my opinion. He is too vanilla to be untouchable. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Less so the vanilla aspect. I think that the things he brings to the game are going to become increasingly valuable. His physicality. He's for his size, especially a very good skater. I think it's just a matter of, you know, whether or not a team wants to take a shot on a player like that. You look at like Jordan Harris, for example. Jordan Harris is actually headed to Boston, I believe, which is gross. But Jordan Harris is an example of a player that Montreal traded, another who was on in that similar spot of on the outside looking in on the Canadiens' defensive mix, not being able to make it work, going to another team, the other team hoping he's going to be able to take another step with us, and then he just doesn't. Especially on a team like Columbus, who took a lot of strides forward this year, you would have thought that, Harris would have just by osmosis improved in that respect. He didn't. And I wonder, not to say that, well, it happened with Harris, so it's going to happen with Struble, but that's the risk that teams make when they go to acquire a player like a Jayden Struble, a guy who, especially this year, he has fantastic underlying numbers because he spent a good portion of the year, not a lot of it, but a good portion of it with Lane Hutson, who elevated a lot of those numbers. And we'll always kind of wonder, is this the tail wagging the dog here? As in, like, is Jayden Struble actually carrying his own on this line, or is it just what we expect it to be, which is Lane Hutson carrying the play? Jayden Struble's arbitration hearing is set for August 3rd. So we have some time between now and then before either the Canadiens to figure this out, to move on from the player. I would imagine I don't know that they'll trade a player who's eligible for arbitration. I wonder what the optics of that would be, especially as an acquiring team, right? Like, we don't know this player is going to go to arbitration. We need to know he's going to want to sign with us at the number we're going to give him. Otherwise, we're not trading for him. So unless Jayden Struble figures that out and another team comes in and wants him at that number, that's a different story. But I agree with you. Just looking at the mix on the back end, he is the one I find most likely to be on the outside looking in. They're not. I think we're past the stages of, Arber Xhekaj sitting all that much. I think unless there's a Mike Matheson trade, which again is still a huge question mark. I don't know that the Canadiens have made any strides in that direction. It's tough to know what they're up to at the moment. But unless Mike Matheson is one of the guys leaving the organization, Jayden Struble becomes a player who you wonder, what is his long-term future here? And I think that's the conversation that's happening right now with his contract. I don't think Jayden Struble feels all that comfortable in his long-term future in Montreal. How could he? Right? He's looking at the situation in front of him. It's like, today Bogdan Konushkov signed an extension in the KHL. That means he can't come over here until 2027. Well, if you're Bogdan Konushkov, you're looking at the defensive situation and you're going, where would I have played even if I did come over? He's probably better served staying over there, working on his game, and coming over as a fully developed prospect. So I agree with you. I think Jayden Struble, on the blue line is probably the next one out. Unfortunately, I like the player a lot. I like the meanness, the anger that he brings to his game. He's been a fun guy to watch, a guy that I've wanted to see more of, unfortunately. Also, Randy here, I read that Hutson has been working on his shot. How many goals do you think he has in him this season? Well, what did he have last year? Like 6? I can't remember how many goals he had last year. I know it wasn't a lot. Looking this up now because I'm a bad podcast host. Yes, he had 6. He had 6 goals, 60 assists for 66 points. I don't know how many more goals he has in him, even if he does work on his shot, because I don't think his shot is, below NHL caliber, especially his slap shot. Like, he's not firing that thing. His wrist shot is quite good. When he gets in close, the problem is he's a defenseman. He's not supposed to be all, up close all that often. I remember the goal against Philadelphia where he just came down the wing and put an absolutely perfect shot far corner that barely went in. Like, it just snuck in past the bar. So I wonder how much of his goal scoring ability is going to be hindered by his playmaking ability. In that, yes, I could shoot the puck and have a somewhat decent decent play on most opportunities where I'll be in a situation to shoot it. Or I could, drag a defenseman towards me and find a teammate open, across the ice like he does all the time. I think with a player like Lane Hutson, I care very little if he's shooting the puck so long as he's passing it the way that he is. It would be nice to see him add some goals. Like maybe he becomes a 10 goal scorer. I think that's sort of maybe maxing it out because I just don't see. When I look at Lane Hutson, I see a guy who wants to be a playmaker and a distributor. I don't see a guy who wants to be Mike Green and score 30 goals, right? I see a guy who is far more comfortable in manipulating defenses in a way that creates opportunities for his teammates. And if you're Cole Caulfield, you love that. Nick Suzuki, you love that. Ivan Demidov, you love that coming into your rookie season. You're going to be playing on the power play with him most likely. I think a lot of that. I think a lot of his playmaking is going to be elevated just by the fact that there's going to be more talent in front of him to get the puck to. So we'll see how that plays out. But yes, I think there might be a little bit more goal scoring in him, but I don't know how much. I wonder how much that is capped just purely by his, by the positive that is his playmaking. We'll go to Boondoggle here next. I thought Newhook looked much better playing with Demidov. Could the 2C we need be Dach playing with Demidov? With the right type of winger, couldn't Dach come back to his form he had in his first year with the Habs? This summer, one of the prevailing thoughts that I have when I am just driving home from work and I'm just thinking about hockey because I'm a sicko. One of the things that I often have to like come to terms with is Kirby Dach going to ever be that player that we saw a year ago or 2 years ago rather? And I keep coming back to I think it's possible. I don't know how probable it is, but I think there's a distinct possibility that what was happening to him last year was, yes, the remnants of his knee injury, and yes, he did not, he might not have taken his preparation as seriously last year, and I think a lot of it was between the ears, and I think it's all of those things are reversible, right? They're not death sentences. He can fix all of those things. It's just a matter of whether or not he's able to. I think the Canadiens seem pretty. I think they're realistic about his chances of returning to that form. But I don't know. Again, like they can't bank on it. The time of banking on Kirby Dach as your number 2 center is gone. That's not to say it'll never happen. It's just to say the Canadiens cannot position themselves to only have Dach as that option. To your point on Newhook, I also thought he looked pretty good with Demidov, especially, I think a couple opportunities in the playoffs, but especially deep, in those last 2 games of the regular season. I just wonder about the size on that line at that point. It's not an overly big line. You would need a guy like maybe a Bolduc playing on the other side. You could put Laine. Yes, he's 6'5", 6'4", but he doesn't always play like he's that size. You would need somebody who's going to lay the body and get the puck back. And I think Bolduc would be a great option to play with Demidov and insert center here. Because those, like Bolduc, his whole game is focused on his forecheck and stealing the puck from the other team and creating opportunities for his line mates. I think that's going to be an underrated part of his game moving forward. All right, last question from Nathaniel on Bluesky. Actually, I think we have 2 more questions. This one from Nathaniel. I dreamt last night that the Habs traded Gallagher. It was a shock. Sadly, the dream didn't reveal the reasons, timing, or return. So questions. Do you think Hugo would consider trading him this season, and why would they? I don't think Gallagher is an untouchable, but I do think that it's very difficult for him to be moved. His cap hits just is what it is. And yes, a lot of teams could take on that cap hit, but it's not the wisest use of your salary cap. And I just think I don't think there's a way Montreal wins a Brendan Gallagher trade because I don't think anybody's going to give up anything of significance for him. And you'd be trading a lifer. I find that would be really difficult. It's not to say it'll never happen, but it is to say I find it would be complicated to pull off. I can't see why a lot of teams would want to go after a guy like Gallagher. He still provides a lot of value. The cap hit just is what it is. And I don't think I think Gallagher is more valuable on the Canadiens than any sum of the parts they'll get for him. So I just personally think that that's not going to happen. They need veterans to continue to lead this young core, and Gallagher's, very, very high up on that list. All right, this is the last question from Steven Yerxa. Hi, guys. I've been listening to the podcast for a few months now. Thank you very much. As a new Montreal fan and someone new to regularly watching hockey, what do I need to know going into the 25-26 season? It's a loaded question. From the Canadiens' perspective, it's the first season in a long time where there's actual expectations. And not to say that the expectation is that they'll make the playoffs, but the expectation is that they'll be in that situation. Unlike last year when they said they were going to be in the mix and everyone kind of laughed and, thought that didn't really mean anything, but it turned out it did. They were in the mix. And that mix ended with them making the playoffs. I think league wide, the main storylines to watch are obviously, can the Panthers repeat? Can they go, can they three-peat rather? Other than that, we're really, it's a league and a sport that sort of centers around transactional news. So like everyone's looking at where Sidney Crosby ends up, whether he stays in Pittsburgh or moves on. Everyone's going to be watching Connor McDavid to figure out where he signs, because he's still not signed to an extension. He's going into his final year on his contract. And if he hits free agency, it would be the largest free agency of option of all time. Nothing comes close. So there's a lot of storylines to cover. I think we'll cover more about, what the next season looks like for the Canadiens. Obviously, the Canadiens next year, they're getting Ivan Demidov full-time in their lineup. That's going to be the player to watch in Montreal, and see if Montreal can go back-to-back with Calder trophies. So we'll have to see what happens there. All right. We'll leave our mailbag there. Thank you all so much for submitting your questions. It really means a lot to us that you guys are interested and want to participate in that section of the show. So we really appreciate it. But we have to get to our trivia, and then I'm sending you all off into the weekend. Last question from Wednesday was, the number 21 is not a standard number for a defenseman. Of course, Jayden Struble wears it now. Of the 38 players to wear the number 21 for the Habs, only 11 of them were defensemen. Since the year 2000, only 3 defensemen have worn the number 21 in Montreal. Can you name the remaining 2? Obviously, Jayden Struble was one of those 3. The other 2 were David Schlemko, who played 55 games over 2 seasons in Montreal, scored 7 points, and Barry Richter, 2 assists in 25 games with Montreal over 2 seasons. So not great company there for Jayden Struble to be, and he's obviously the best one of those 21s in Montreal. The answer was given to us correctly by Jason Libb, Super Rain, and Jeff Harples. So thanks a lot for playing, you guys. You guys are sort of always up in that conversation for getting the trivia questions. So glad you guys are participating and enjoying it. All right, today's question: how many points would rookie Ivan Demidov need next season to break the Habs rookie scoring record? Not tie it, but how many points would he need to break it and have it all on his own? If you have the answer, put it in the comments down below this video. Let us know how smart you are, and we'll give you a shout out on the next episode of the show. And that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in and for making us your first listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and part of the Locked On Podcast Network is the Locked On NHL Podcast. There's no off season, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter most, the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We are Locked On Canadiens just about everywhere we are posting things: Bluesky, Instagram, and TikTok primarily. Follow us on all those platforms to get some clips of the shows, some other fun graphics along the way. You can find me at Maybe It's Ian. You can find Laura at The Active Stick. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will see you guys on Monday.